All right, in this video, we'll be looking at the anatomy of the heart and not going so much into how the heart works, but just looking at the parts. And then we'll have other videos about how the heart works, the physiology of the heart. So first, let's just talk about the heart in general. It's a transport system. It's basically a pump that pumps blood throughout the body, and the body has a system of blood vessels, and we'll talk more about those blood vessels. And the heart has two sides. The right side, which receives oxygen poor blood from the tissues and pumps it out into the lungs to get more oxygen. And then there's the left side that receives that blood from the lungs and then pumps that blood out to the whole body. We will have an entire video that traces the path of blood through the body. And so you don't need to know anything. That's just the general idea. Left side receives from the body, pumps to the lungs. Right side from the body to the lungs. Left side from the lungs to the body. And you have two chambers of the heart, or two sets of chambers. You have the atria and the ventricles. The atria are the receiving chambers. The right atria receives from the lungs. The right atria receives from the body. The left atria receives from the lungs. And then you have the pumping chambers. The right ventricle pumps to the lungs. The left ventricle pumps to the body. The heart is approximately the size of your fist, and it weighs about a pound. So that's pretty incredible for that little organ. The circulatory system is divided basically into two circuits. Think of it as two loops, whereas the heart is where those loops meet. If you drew two eights on top of each other, that would kind of be the way of looking at it. And you have the pulmonary circuit. This is the portion that goes to the lungs and back. And you have the systemic circuit. This word systemic just means the whole. And so systemic circuit goes to the body and back. The heart is located. You can kind of see exactly where it's located there. You have between the second and fifth ribs, slightly to the left side of the body. Some of the heart is right underneath the sternum, as you can see from that picture. This one probably a little bit better, actually. And then about 2/3 of the heart is slightly to the left of the sternum. The outside of the heart, there's a covering called the pericardium. And this is just a tough outer covering that protects the heart. It anchors the heart to the surrounding structures. It prevents the heart from kind of overfilling as well. If you've ever heard of someone having fluid on their heart, it's this sac that fills up with fluid. The heart obviously pumps fluid, but this is when the inside of this pericardium fills with water or something else. This pericardium has two layers to it. You don't need to know the name of those layers, but it's just a very tough covering. Most of the body's organs have some sort of bag that they're floating in, and then there's like bags that hold those bags, if that makes sense. And so everything's kind of contained really nice. There are three types of muscles found in the heart. The whole of it's called cardiac muscle, but there are three layers of the heart wall. There's the epicardium. This is the outermost layer, the visceral layer. There's the myocardium. Myo is the middle or the muscle. This is most of that. Most of the heart is the myocardium. What you have in this myocardium is you have what's called the cardiac skeleton. It's not bones, but it's this crisscrossing layers of connective tissue. It makes it really tough and strong, anchors all of those cardiac muscle fibers as well, and supports the valves that are located in the heart. It limits the way that the heart can work in a good way, and so so the myocardium is the functional muscle tissue basically of the heart. And then you have the endocardium, which kind of forms this lining of the heart and the heart chambers, and then on into the blood vessels. So just the gross anatomy of the heart. Again, you have two atria. Those are the superior chambers. You can see them left and right atria here. And again, this is the person's left that we would be looking at, and left and right atria. And then the left and right ventricles. You have what's called the inner atrial septum, which you can't really see here, but it separates the two atria. And then you have the inner ventricular septum, which you can see really bright here, or really big here. And you can see the ventricle walls are much thicker because they're doing a lot more of the pumping. The atrial walls are just basically pumping it into the ventricle, whereas the ventricles are pumping it out into the body, whether to the lungs or to the whole rest of the body. So a little bit about the atria before we get, and then the ventricles, and then we'll go into valves. So atria, small, thin-walled chambers. They don't contribute a whole lot to the propulsion of blood. The right atria receives the deoxygenated blood from the body, so that's right here, and receives it from these really big veins called the vena cava. This is the superior vena cava coming from the head, the inferior vena cava coming from the rest of the body. You can kind of see how they empty into this little chamber here. And you can, and then there's also blood coming in from the heart itself on these veins called coronary veins, which we will talk more about that in another video. But basically, all of those blood gets received that doesn't have oxygen, and then sends it into this ventricle and out into the lungs. The left atria receives it from the lungs. This has oxygen in it, and it's these pulmonary veins that return that blood to this atria. The right ventricle, we're seeing ventricles in general made up of their thicker walls, a lot more muscle. This is the actual pumping chambers of the heart. The right ventricle pumps it out to the lungs, and the left ventricle, the largest portion of the heart, pumps it out into the rest of the body. You can see these really thick muscles here. And then lastly, are valves. A valve is like a one-way opening. If you think about the heart, just think about a tube of toothpaste for a minute. If tube of toothpaste has one opening, let's say that you cut the bottom open as well, and then you tried to squeeze toothpaste onto your toothbrush. It wouldn't be very effective because it would be coming out at both ends. And so the way to prevent that is to have the bottom closed, like when you buy it in the package. And so then it just comes out one end. Well, the heart is very similar in that once blood goes in, it can't go backwards because of these valves. And so the valves ensure the unidirectional blood flow through the heart. There's no backwards flow. That would be very inefficient. And so they open and close as a response to pressure changes. Think like a trash can lid. You push the little thing, it opens up, and opens for you. You put trash in, it closes, and you can't open it the other way. So it only responds to pressure in one way. There are two major types of valves. There are the valves located between the atria and the ventricle, as you can see here. And then there are the valves located between the ventricles and these major arteries, right? Whereas it could be pulmonary arteries going out to the lungs, or this big old artery here called the aorta, which goes out into the rest of the body. And those, again, the big thing with valves is that they prevent the backwards flow of blood.